Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. On this, a Tuesday, it is the 27th day of January in the year 2015. It is cold. It is snowy. We, here in Appalachia, we really dodged a bullet on this particular storm. And my thoughts go out and my prayers go out to those in New England who are bearing the brunt of this storm. I think New York City dodged a bullet. Also, I mean, they got almost a foot of snow, but compared to what they were projecting, I believe that they feel very, very fortunate. I just hope they don't take it out on the mayor, because the mayor shut down the city in anticipation of the predictions. But as I watched the meteorologist this morning, it was a difference of 50 miles as far as the storm. The storm moved about 50 miles further out to sea than they anticipated, and that meant that while Long Island got pounded, the city of New York didn't. So I think the mayor erred, if you will, in the, in favor of safety and security and making sure, and I think it was a good move. Anyway, welcome to the program, and if there are folks listening from the area that is getting pounded, we're with you, and I want you to know that. It is an absolutely gorgeous day, and I want to tell these people that when the storm passes, the sky will turn blue and the sun will come out, and you will enjoy the kind of day that we are having here. So I hope that your day is going well, and I want to thank you for joining us here at the Virtual Center. Today is Tuesday. It is our abbreviated programs. We are beginning 30 minutes late. Which means that when we reach the top of the hour in about 25 minutes, we will take a short break, but it will not be anything, not the 5 minutes that we usually take between the 2 full hours of our program. We'll pause for a couple of minutes and kind of get our bearings, hopefully, and take some liquid in order to renew the voice box, as it were, and we'll get back to business. We would love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-HORN, H-O-R-N, which is the 4676. If you'd like to email me directly on the issues we're dealing with right now, which was the short story by Ursula Le Guin, or whether you would like to talk about other issues or concerns you might have related to the Virtual Center, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906@gmail.com. I've received some comments about yesterday's program, more specifically about Wayne's call on the issue of prevailing wage. While it was focused here in West Virginia, I think we made the point in the course of our discussions with Wayne that this clearly has national implications as well. But a number of people talked about, first of all, how knowledgeable on the subject Wayne is. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I thought it was one of the more informative and fruitful hours we've had here at the Virtual Center in some time. And it's very interesting because things come up that remind you or relate to other things. And I just had that experience. As you know, the reason we are a half hour late on Tuesdays is because I attend a local Rotary Club meeting, which meets at noon here in Beckley, West Virginia. And since the program doesn't end until 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I can't get home in time to get on the air until 1:30. So that's really the issue. But what I wanted to share with you is that our program today was delivered by our local director of our local library, our county library system. We have 3 branches within the county, as well as 2 bookmobiles. What made the program particularly interesting, at least to me, was that she acknowledged as part of her presentation that a lot of people have raised the issue with her. Why do we need libraries anymore? Now most people do their research on the internet. Most people spend a lot of time reading on the internet. They can get books. They have Kindles. They have iPads. They have all of these things. And so in essence, are the traditional libraries becoming outdated? Do we need them anymore? And of course, one of her first response is that she continues to have faith in the printed word. I think most people agreed with that. I know I do. But she also said that the direction and the focus of the library continues to change, continues to expand. And as evidence of that, she was talking about the fact that she has been selected, along with 20 other librarians from around the country, to participate in a panel that'll be meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, in Chicago. And after this day-long panel discussion and conference that she will be attending, it will be followed by an intensive 16-week online program, follow-up program, on the issue of career counseling, as the focus, obviously not just locally here, but the focus nationally, is more and more on serving the career needs of displaced people. She talked about the fact that even here in southern West Virginia, where jobs are scarce, she talked about the increased number of people served by the library who are people that worked in the same fields for 15, 20, 25 years and then find themselves displaced. Many of them, not all of them, but some of them, I would say, don't have the necessary computer skills they need in today's world for a successful job search. Many of them have never been faced with the issue of putting together a resume or writing the kind of response or application letter that associates a resume, if indeed they have one. And so more and more the libraries are moving into this area, and she is as one of the people selected to do this. And basically, she said that one of the areas that, besides the extensive and variety of programs they have for young people, for children, which the libraries have had for a long time. And of course, she reiterated the importance of getting kids reading early and keeping them reading and getting them used to the library and to enjoy books and all that. And I think all of us can agree with that. But the other thing is the number of adults that the library is serving, and not just casual readers who come in to pick up a book or sit in the reading room and look at journals or look at the newspapers or whatever. But a lot of adults who come in there want some help with computer searches, with resume construction, want to know about psychological tests which identify their strengths as they try to retool, if you will, for a job search that many of them never expected to be making. And first of all, I found the presentation particularly interesting, and it was very good. But the thing that struck me, and I was the only one there that of course had experienced this, was our program yesterday with Wayne on the elimination of prevailing wage legislation in West Virginia. And the inconsistency between those two issues. And I kept thinking, here we are focusing on the people that have some of the best jobs we still have left. And now there's legislation to eliminate them and turn them into mundane jobs at embarrassing salaries. And the fact of the matter is we're talking about construction skills in some of our most important public buildings. And we're talking about ways that we can pay them an embarrassing low wage of $15 an hour, as opposed to the current prevailing wage scale, which is $30, $35, or $40 an hour. And the fact of the matter is, as Wayne pointed out, if you project $30 an hour over the entire year, you're talking about a salary for regular time. This is, of course, barring overtime during that year. In the low 50s, and $52,000 a year or something, which is hardly living high. It's actually toward the lower end of the frame of reference we used yesterday when identifying the kind of income that enables one to be called middle class. 52,000 when the bottom level is 35,000. The upper level is 100. 52,000 is not in the middle. It's toward the lower end. And here we are in a state that is desperate for jobs, basically saying, why should these people make $30 an hour when so many people in West Virginia are having trouble finding jobs, etc. So the way we deal with it is to basically take away from the few people who have, in order to pacify the envy or the bitterness, if you will, of the people who don't. Instead of trying to find a way to grow success, it seems to me we spend our time bickering over the few people, not that are becoming, extraordinarily successful, but are basically at the place where most of us hope to be and feel like we should be. That's the first thing I thought of, is the inconsistency in light of this lady's presentation on the need to do career counseling and job counseling for adults in the middle of their working years, if you will. The second thing that I found quite interesting because of the timing was the fact that the mentality and the ideology which supports the elimination of prevailing wage in this kind of an environment is the same kind of mentality that Ursula Le Guin is talking about in her short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Namely, the people that really can't understand or feel or appreciate or even experience the kind of happiness that the people in Omelas are experiencing. The only thing they can understand is the negativism that seems always to be associated with the definition of happiness that they know and can understand and embrace. Namely, your happiness has to be at somebody else's expense. And if somebody else is happy and you're not, then your focus is not to try to figure out a way to get up where they are. Your priority is figuring out a way to drag them down to where you are. And it seems to be that is exactly the frame of reference or the mindset that Ursula Le Guin is criticizing. If we can say that she is criticizing it, she definitely is comparing this approach to happiness, recognizing that the only kind of happiness we know is a happiness that is offset with pain or misery or despair. And the legislation that Wayne was talking about yesterday to eliminate prevailing wage in a state with an economy that is in serious trouble seems to me to be a classic example of that very mentality that she is talking about and forcing us as readers to confront. I found it so interesting and so meaningful. And I was kind of wishing that other people in the audience, other Rotarians who were in attendance, who were listening to her presentation and evaluating it and appreciating it in isolation, as it were, how much richer and more meaningful they would have recognized that her presentation really was if they had been privy to the things that Wayne was telling us yesterday here at the virtual center. I don't mean to overly dramatize or make more of this than it warrants. But at the same time, I felt that the perspective that Wayne gave me yesterday was one which gave me the opportunity to appreciate some of the things that this lady was saying, much more than I probably would have had we not had yesterday's conversation with Wayne on prevailing wage. If you were not able to be with us yesterday, and you weren't able to hear Wayne's presentation in real time, is about a 40-minute segment in our first hour, the 1 to 2 p.m. hour. If you go to the archives and just look at the date, which was the 26th of January, 2015, you'll be able to experience. You can go to the whiterosesociety.org, or you can go to YouTube and just look up my name, Bill O'Brien, Dr. Bill O'Brien, and you'll find yesterday's program archived there by date. I would really recommend that you avail yourself of the opportunity, because it's one of our better ones. I don't know whether you have anything or any comment or commentary or concerns or issues or things to add to the comments that I made, but if you do, I invite you to give us a call at 304-663-4676. Or again, you can email me, waobrien906@gmail.com. Yesterday's program was kind of special because not only were we blessed with 45 minutes of conversation with Wayne, but in our second hour we had the pleasure of hearing from Bob Kincaid, who called in on our discussion about the short story by Ursula Le Guin. And I don't know about you, but if you were privy to yesterday's program in our second hour, when we ended our time at 3 p.m., I was just getting cranked up. I was ready to go. I just thought it was fantastic. And what made it good, it seems to me, Bob and I were talking about this before we went on the air today, because as you know, Bob is producing this program from the Horn Studios. And in our conversation this afternoon, Bob made the point that that's really the value of dialogue. I made the comment to Bob today that we touched on things and looked at issues and perspectives yesterday related to this short story that I was convinced probably never crossed the author's mind when she wrote that short story. I'm sure some of it did, but I'm sure that other things did not. In a sense, then, what that suggests is that while, and this was the focus of yesterday's program, to me, at least this portion of it, the advantage of reading the primary source as opposed to a secondary source. and how valuable that is, because by definition, the secondary source is not going to is not going to contain everything that the primary source contains. The only way you could do that is to reproduce the original. And so, while we, I think, have made the case for the advantage of reading the source over the secondary source, what we haven't discussed was the extent to which what we derive from the primary source can be expanded and go in so many different directions as a result of the back and forth conversation you have with other people who have only one thing in common that matters, and that is that they are both familiar with the primary source. In other words, once we all read the same thing, once we all know the basics, then what is within each of us makes itself felt. And each of us begins to make contributions in the course of back and forth dialogue, conversation, whatever you want to call it. And the results is that insights and ideas and perspectives and possibilities emerge that never would have emerged without the conversation. And when you get into that area, you can be pretty sure that we've gone way beyond where the author was, where, in this case, she wrote the original short story. We learned so much from the interaction and the dialogue. And that's what I say. When our program ended yesterday, I was just getting started, because there were so many issues and so many things about this story that were crossing my mind, were coming into focus as a result of the very brief conversation that I had with Bob Kincaid about this short story, that I was primed to learn more. And I think that is what every teacher at every level dreams about, is hitting that note or touching that button or whatever it is that allows that to happen. If you're in a classroom, when we say this all the time, it's kind of a cliche, but believe me, it's real, because I've experienced it, not nearly as often as I'd like to, but I have experienced it. And that is standing in front of a class and watching a person or a couple of people actually light up because a flashbulb has gone off. Something has clicked. And at that point, that particular student, that particular child, has become engaged with the topic. And at that point, that particular student not only is receiving information and ideas which contribute to knowledge, but with that spark has reached the point where that child can also become a contributor to the expansion of knowledge of other people. And that's the spark, that's the hot button that every teacher wants to find and to be able to activate. It doesn't happen nearly as often as we would hope, but when it happens, it's magic. And it happened to me yesterday. And Bob Kincaid is the one that did it, by a couple of the insights and questions that he was raising about this particular short story. So I think it's magic, and I'm hoping that a little bit of that magic came across to those who happened to be listening at the time, or who will listen to it on the archive. So if you do have the opportunity to revisit yesterday's program, first hour, Wayne, second hour, discussion of the short story, Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, I think you will you'll find things there that you didn't know, that you didn't think about going in. I hope you will. I hope you will enjoy it. We are at 55 minutes after the hour. We've got about 5 minutes before we stop for a brief break. I want to get back into the short story. It's really interesting because I keep calling it a short story because indeed it is. But the fact of the matter is, once we get into this today, this will be, I think, our 5th program here at the Virtual Center on this short story, and we're just a little beyond halfway through it. So I think that what we can conclude here is the value of good literature. And again, it can be a letter. I think back the last time here at the Virtual Center that I can recall being excited about one of the sources we looked at was the entry in the letter that Jefferson wrote to Maria Causeway on the dialogue or the debate between his head and his heart. That seemed to me to come alive. The opportunity, the learning opportunities from that particular letter, it seemed to me, were immense. And I'm seeing this in this short story as well. And again, all of this is relevant to the mission of the Virtual Center in so many ways. It deals with education, it deals with primary sources, it deals with analysis, it deals with the way we learn and the way we grow and the way we know. It deals with the issue of civic responsibility because of the subject at hand. We are talking about the nature and functioning of a community. We are talking about the issue of governing a community, the issue of finding a way to bring happiness to the maximum number of people in your community. We are talking about all of those things. We are talking about the psychological makeup of our own community, of our own world, of our own culture, of our own worldview. It seems to me all of that is directly related to the mission of the Virtual Center. I trust, I hope, that you will agree with me. You will recall that yesterday's program, we ended, as far as our progress through the story, we ended with the explanation of the room and the child who lived in misery within it. And we focused our dialogue, our conversation, on the nature of that child, where that child came from, and all, the misery and all the rest of it. Again, I think, and I remember making this point yesterday, and I'll make this, and then we'll pause and take our break. I think all of this is in the context of the author's point that if we have trouble relating to the happiness, to the idea of happiness being experienced by the people of Amalas, then the author suggests that by adding this negative note, namely the little dark room in the basement that houses this child living in misery, and the extent to which the happiness outside the room and the misery inside are connected and related, at least in the minds of the people. Her context, her reason for presenting this, is that if we're having trouble relating to the happiness of Amalas up to this point, her comment is, once you add this negative, she is assuming that we will be much more comfortable because we're used to seeing happiness offset with misery or pain or despair, as she says. I think that's a devastating criticism of our culture. That in fact, we can't know happiness unless we can relate it or hold it up against or weigh it against or measure it against despair and misery and agony. In order for many to be successful, some must be in pain. And that really seems, in her mind, to constitute the essence of our worldview? And the fact of the matter is, maybe it does. And the example of that is Wayne's program yesterday on the move to take away the requirements for paying prevailing wage in a state where people are in pain. Taking those who are not in pain and putting them in pain somehow, to many people, seems to be the optimum way to go. That's a worldview, and as Ursula Le Guin is suggesting in this story, it's not the only worldview, but unfortunately it's the one that we relate to. With that, let's pause and take a very brief break. We've just gone beyond the top of the hour. It's 1 minute after the hour of 2 in the Eastern time zone. Let's just pause and take 2 minutes. We'll take a break, a little bit of renewal, and then we'll come back with our second full hour, and we'll return to Omelas. This is Bill O'Brien. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. After a 2-minute break, we'll be right back. Thank you.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Here again, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome back to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're in our second hour on this Tuesday, the 27th day of January. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. I must admit to you that I asked Bob via email while we were on break the particular music that we heard during the break. And of course it's Beethoven's Ninth. And when I say of course it's Beethoven's Ninth, I'm kind of suggesting shouldn't I have known that? And the fact of the matter is my appreciation and understanding of music is quite limited, unfortunately. I think I'm probably at the stage of my life where I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot to change that, except that I love Bob's selection of music, and I love to find out where it's coming from, and especially when I really enjoy it, and I found that to be exhilarating. So that's why I asked. So thank you, Bob. And again, we are returning to Omelas in this our second hour. And I welcome you. If you were not with us during our first half hour, we spent most of the time talking a little bit about yesterday's program and kind of setting the stage for the continuation of our treatment of this absolutely wonderful, wonderful short story on those who walk away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin, L-E-G-U-I-N. We finished yesterday after the author introduced us to the child in the room, and it precipitated a number of questions and a very, to me, a very exhilarating conversation with Bob and dialogue and ideas. The ideas generated was interesting. And after introducing that room and introducing the child and introducing the people of Omelas and how they responded to the child, the author, in a very short paragraph, kind of brings all of this to a head by talking about the people and their understanding of what the existence of that room and that misery in the midst of the happiness and joy that defines Omelas is all about. She says, they all know it's there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it. We read this paragraph yesterday. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know it has to be there. Some of them understand why. Some do not. But they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest, and the kindly weathers of their skies, depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. We spent a little bit of time talking about that paragraph yesterday and what the message is. And the message is that everybody who knows, and they all do, about the dichotomy or the contradiction between the happiness of the many and the misery of this child, appreciate and understand that it is connected, that one is connected to the other. And we talked about the message that that sends to us, the reader, about what happens to people when they are confronted with change, and how people, even when they are uncomfortable with reality, with the present, they will oftentimes fight to defend that present in the face of change, in the face of the unknown. And so rather than risk the not knowing associated with change, people seem inclined to become more comfortable with what is, even if they find unpleasantness in what is. And we talked about this yesterday. And I want to go on because I think the next issue, the next paragraph that the author gives us, really raises a number of questions here. She says this, meaning that all the good things associated with Omelas depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. She goes on to say, this is usually explained to children when they are between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding. I want to pause there for a moment and ask you to reflect for a moment on the issues she raises. Because what she says is that the dichotomy, the extent to which the happiness and joy depends on the misery, this connection, this relationship, is usually explained to children when they are between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding. Well, the first question I would ask is whether, in fact, people's ability to understand this is usually associated with children between the ages of 8 and 12. I guess the question I'm asking is, what is the depth of the understanding that 12-year-olds, let alone 8-year-olds, will have of this connection? How much of it will they really understand? Or, alternatively, what does the author mean by understanding? Does she really mean understanding? Or is what she really means acceptance, believability? When they are between 8 and 12, they are old enough to believe and to be explained or told the realities of the world in which they are about to enter as teenagers and then eventually, hopefully, adults. So what she is suggesting is that understanding really means being old enough to understand the explanation as to why this reality is real. I would suggest to you that that suggests believability more than it does understanding. I'm wondering whether the author's use of the word understanding in this particular instance is the right word or the wrong word. Does she really mean understanding? But let's go on. Because the question raised is, in order to explain this to children between the ages of 8 and 12, how do you get them to understand? How do you explain this? Put yourself in the position of an adult explaining to 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds the contradiction between the misery of this child and the joy and the happiness of the community at large, and the extent to which all of the good depends on maintenance of the bad. How would you explain that to a 10-year-old? The only way that I could figure it out is to basically send them the message, tell them that this is true because this is what I'm telling you. I'm asking you to believe this and embrace it and appreciate it and recognize that it's real. But no way in the world can I get into the psychological and philosophical connections and issues associated with understanding it. In fact, the reality is, understanding it is a challenge for almost anybody, no matter what their age. We recognize that it's there. But I would venture to guess that Bob Kincaid, as well as myself, still have a little bit of trouble understanding it. We may know it. We may recognize it. We may be made uncomfortable by it. But it's a challenge to understand it. She goes on. And most of those who come to see the child are young people. Though often enough an adult comes or comes back to see the child. So this is explained to children whenever they seem old enough or capable of understanding. And she admits, she says that most of those who come to see the child are young people. Although frequently an adult comes or makes a second visit to see the child. No matter how well the matter has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight. They feel disgust, which they had thought themselves superior to. Couple of questions. How does one feel superior to disgust? How do you reach the point where you feel like you are superior to disgust, and then you find out when you look at this situation that you're really not superior to it at all? When she says superior to it, I wonder if she really means oblivious to it. You come to accept it. You have come to the recognition that somehow this has to be there. I don't know why, but everybody that I meet tells me it has to be there, and it's something I've got to learn to accept. So I guess I accept it. But the reality is, no matter, and I'm quoting here, no matter how well the matter has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight, and they feel disgust. They feel anger, outrage, impotence, despite all the explanations. What does that say to us about the reluctance or the resistance of these young people to the explanations that they are receiving? On a positive note, I kind of like to believe that what we are seeing here is the humanity which really can't totally be repressed in these young people. No matter how much explaining, how much rationalization, or how much of an appeal there is to the fact that your happiness depends on that misery, these young people are still appalled by it. They are outraged by it. They feel a sense of anger and impotence. They would like to do something for the child, she says, but there is nothing they can do. If the child were brought up into the sunlight out of that vile place, if it were cleaned and fed and comforted, no matter, again, if it were cleaned and fed and comfortable, we're still referring to this child as an it, that would be a good thing indeed. But if it were done, in that day and hour, all the prosperity and beauty and delight of Amalas would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms. That's the deal. That's what these people have been told from the time they were 8 years old. And now that they are young people, they've been told it and told it and told it. It's been explained and explained and explained. Yet somehow they feel anger and disgust and impotence. There's something within these people that makes it impossible for them to totally accept the story that they are being asked to believe. I would suggest that this is the most hopeful, positive sign in the entire story. The fact that there is this humanity which can't be crushed no matter how much or how long or how hard you try to repress it. I like to believe, I do believe, that this is the essence of liberalism. This is the essence of progressivism. This is what keeps us going, is the knowledge that we are human beings. And while contemporary society has found very elaborate, creative ways to reason with us and to repress those ideas and those thoughts which raise questions to the reality that those in power seek to impose upon us. There's always something. There's that element, that spark, that little flame of humanity that won't die. There's always the hope that it'll flare up. And I would suggest to you that's the essence of progressivism. I would suggest to you that those who have lost faith in that flame, who have lost faith in people's ability to be human, those who believe that man is totally driven by self-interest, and not only will not, but cannot put aside self-interest in the interest of the public interest. Those people become comfortable with the kind of reality that the author is confronting us with. The author of misery in the face of joy. They are those who accept reality and decide and determine to make the best of it. But there's something in all of us that keeps many of us from buying into that conclusion. We still have hope. We still realize there's something about being human that we cannot totally repress. If it wasn't true, we would still have, if that wasn't true, we would still have slavery. Because if you study Southern society, the Southern slave society, you can't help but recognize that what you are experiencing, what you are seeing, is the most elaborate, sophisticated effort to repress the humanity of Africans in order to get people to believe that they were not human beings. And while it lasted for a long time, it was never totally successful. And that's the hope, that's the promise. But in the process of explaining this here, in this paragraph, the author lays out to us the deal. These are the terms. It would be a good thing to help this child, to clean it up and feed it and comfort it. But if we do it, everything we value will wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms. To exchange all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelas for that single small improvement, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the chance for the happiness of one, that would be to let guilt within the walls. Indeed. That's a bargain that common sense, reason, logic tells us is not a good one. In a society based upon the Enlightenment, in our modern, enlightened, modernized society, we have been led to believe, we do believe, that the best interests of the many trump the miseries of the few. And our entire education system, our entire way of looking at the world, reinforces that equation, that bargain, that balance, that scale. If you read Supreme Court decisions, every one of them is driven by that very, very logic. It explains our way of life, our civilization. It's the bargain that the modern world makes with the human beings that live within it. Those are the terms. I think this is an incredibly important piece of literature. She says in conclusion here, the terms are strict and absolute. There may not even be a kind word spoken to the child. Those are the terms. This is the deal. So however much individuals might want to do something for that child, the fact of the matter is the implicit contract, the deal, suggests that you better not do it because you could be jeopardizing the happiness of the many for the welfare of one. Hardly a good deal. Once the terms of the contract are explained, the author focuses on the people of Amalas and their reaction to that deal. Often the young people go home in tears or in a tearless rage when they have seen the child and faced this terrible paradox. Some of them cry. Some of them are extremely angry. Some of them are in a rage. They may brood over it for weeks or years, she says. But as time goes on, they begin to realize that even if the child could be released, it would not get much good of its freedom. A little vague pleasure of warmth and food, no doubt, but little more. It is too degraded and imbecile to know any real joy. It has been afraid too long ever to be free of fear. Its habits are too uncouth for it to respond to humane treatment. Indeed, after so long, it would probably be wretched without walls about it to protect it, and darkness for its eyes, and its own excrement to sit in. This is the author's explanation of rationalization. This is the author's explanation as to how the people of Amalas come to terms with the paradox of the child living in misery within the city experiencing happiness and joy. Eventually, for some soon, for many much later, for a few never. This becomes the coming to terms with reality. It's too late. Nothing we could do for this child can work. The child is too degraded and imbecile to ever experience joys. It has become an animal. It has become an it. It cannot respond to humane treatment because it has ceased to be human. For so long, after so long, it would probably be wretched without walls about it to protect it, and darkness for its eyes, and its own excrement to sit in. In other words, the absolute misery and abominable conditions that this child has been forced to live in the minds of most people, given the appropriate time, not only become the circumstances that this child must live in, but become the circumstances that this child can only live in. In other words, this child has reached the point where nothing but these miserable, abominable conditions can work. The environment is consistent with the circumstances of the terms of the contract. Nothing that we can do can help. In fact, the walls that restrain and keep this child from being free become the only way that we can shield it, protect it from the hostile world outside. So suddenly the walls that imprison this child become the security blanket that protects it. This is a total coming to terms, a classic explanation of rationalization. We saw the same thing in the literature coming from the South prior to the Civil War that converted discomfort with slavery to defense of slavery as a positive good. Under the barrage of attacks from abolitionists, attacking the institution of slavery as evil and inhumane, apologists are able to turn the entire thing around and suggest that the institution of slavery, given the nature and the reality of slaves themselves, the institution of slavery, the rules within which they are forced to live, is not an evil, but a positive good. Their tears at the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality and to accept it. Once people accept the realities of this situation, they recognize it as reality, even though it comes as a form of terrible justice, she says, and they accept it. Yet it is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity, and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives. Now, we move into yet another phase of this whole entire psychological experience for the people of Amalas. Once they accept, once they know reality, once they cease to question reality, the existing conditions, once they abandon the idea that there might be alternative ways to deal with this, once they reach this point, then they move on to recognize that all of this reality is indeed the true source of the splendor in their lives. Theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child that they are so gentle with children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, The other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music as the young riders line up in their beauty for the race in the sunlight of the first morning of summer. In other words, the final connection, the final peg in this puzzle, the final piece to this puzzle, is when they come to realize that everything about their life that is good is linked to the reality of this child and its existence. Now she asks us, now do you believe in them? Are they not more credible? She is forcing us to confront the reality of the bargain that the people of Omelas have made in rationalizing or coming to terms with the realities of their life. And when she asks us, now do you believe in them? Are they not more credible? What she's telling to us is, now that you understand the whole picture, the extent to which all the positives are offset by the negatives, now you've got something that you can embrace, something that you can put your arms on, something around, something that you can relate to. She's speaking to us. In effect, what she's doing is telling us what we most understand as a culture, as a civilization. She is forcing us, the reader, to come to terms with the realities of the world that we live in. The nature of what Ferdinand Tönnies referred to as pure Gesellschaft. The happiness and the joy which is outwardly visible in Omelas seems to be the perfect image of Gemeinschaft. But once you understand and include the child in the dark room and understand the bargain that is associated, that these people may have made, then you come to recognize the realities of Gesellschaft. And the extent to which the only way that people can deal rationally and psychologically and emotionally with Gesellschaft is to presume that it is reality, it is Gemeinschaft. Being able to psychologically deal with Gesellschaft can only happen when you convert it into the Gemeinschaft. When you convince yourself that all the elements, all the things, some of which are clearly uncomfortable, but they all fit and they all make sense and they're all interdependent. Once you reach that point, or make that conclusion, you have reached the point in your mind where the elements of Gesellschaft are really Gemeinschaft. And so now your job is to turn that into the happiest, most joyous, the best damn Gemeinschaft you can make. And the better job you can do with it, the more comfortable and fulfilled you believe you are. But in the process, you have abandoned the child in despair. You have obliterated the room, the darkness and the misery and the agony within the room. Because you have recognized that in order for all of the good things of your Gemeinschaft to exist, The one thing you can't do is tamper with that room or what's in it. That's the bargain. It's almost a Faustian bargain. When Faust addresses the issue of selling your own soul, is that what the people of Amalas have done? Or even more painful, is that what we have done and what we continue to do? As we find ways to ignore the misery, to ignore the pain, to ignore the suffering in the world around us, and encourage those who have the power and the ability to do so to build up barriers. Make it somehow so I don't have to look at this all the time, because I can't do anything about it. I won't do anything about it. Because these people that seem to be living in such misery actually love it. The people who don't work and who are on the take, on the dole, they love it. They raise their children to find ways to get on the dole so they can live off the labor and the sweat of somebody else's brow. That's happiness in this Gemeinschaft, which, if you really analyze it and tear it apart, is the epitome of Gesellschaft. And then she says, in conclusion, but there's one more thing to tell, and this is quite incredible. There's one more part to this story about the ones who walk away from Amalas, and it is the ones who walk away from Amalas. At times, one of the adolescent girls or boys who go to see the child does not go home to weep or rage, does not, in fact, go home at all. Sometimes also a man or woman much older falls silent for a day or two and then leaves home. These people go out into the street and walk down the street alone. They keep walking and walk straight out of the city of Amalas, through the beautiful gates. They keep walking across the farmlands of Amalas. Each one goes alone, youth or girl, man or woman. Night falls. The traveler must pass down village streets, between the houses with yellow-lit windows, and on out into the darkness of the fields. Each alone, they go west or north towards the mountains. They go on. They leave Amalas. They walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist. But they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Amalas. The very last paragraph, the very last piece of the puzzle, the very last issue or idea in the entire story is its title, becomes the title of this short story. The ones who walk away from Amalas. It is the title which introduces the story, and it is the final group of words that end the story. To the author, the ones who walk away from Amalas are important enough to the author to warrant the honor of getting to be the story's title. What is Ursula Le Guin telling us or saying to us here? The ones who walk away, the ones who are willing to abandon what they know, the world they know, Omelas, with all its happiness and all its joy and all its music and all its sunshine and all its color and all its laughing, and to walk by themselves into the darkness, into a world they don't know, but into a world that they are willing to risk in the face of the world that they do know. These are the people who cannot come to terms with the terms of the contract. These are the people who become the focus of attention for the author. Are these the hero? Are these the ones that are so human that no amount of explanation, no amount of logic, no amount of rationalization or coming to terms can offset the misery and the anger and the pain which they feel whenever they look at or think about the child in the dark room? Are these the real human beings of Omelas? Question. As these people leave Omelas and walk into the darkness, do they constitute the soul of Omelas? Is this message from the author the fact that the last essence of humanity within Omelas is walking away and leaving? Does this suggest that there's no more humanity left in Omelas? That this suggests that the humanity, the concern for one's fellow human beings that produced the tears and the anger and the despair and the disgust, has either been rationalized, or if it can't be, it is being excluded from Omelas. The last vestiges of humanity are walking into the darkness. They are leaving. Does this create a situation for us, for me, for you, as a reader? Are we to conclude that these people are heroes because they're the last vestiges of humanity in Omelas? Or might the message be that Omelas has, with their departure, Omelas has totally sold out? There's nothing left to respect or to hope for in Omelas. It has completely become devoid of feeling and passion and concern and love. And that everything that remains, all the joy and all the happiness and all the music and all the rest of it, is merely a cover. It's superficial. It has no depth and substance. Its purpose is to cover up the evil and the misery that constitutes the terms of life in Omelas. Or are these people who walk away weaklings? These are the ones that are most bothered by the terms of the contract. These are the ones clearly that are most bothered by the abominable existence that continues to exist within that room. They have obviously reached the point that they can't do anything about it except to abandon it and walk away from it. Is that a positive? Or is it a negative? Are these people being realistic? Or are they running away from the challenge? Are these people to be respected or to be pitied? In the previous issues that we looked at in this short story, we talked about the hope for those young people who fight and resist the efforts to explain the reality of the terms of the contract. And I mentioned the fact that this, to me, is the element of hope that continues to exist in Omelas. But now we are confronted with the people who walk away from it, who can't come to terms with it, who won't come to terms with it. But they have made the decision to walk away from it rather than to deal with it. If we define those who are able to come totally to terms with the situation in Omelas, if we had to define those people as the realists, as the worldly, as the most rational, the most logical, the ones who are willing to come to terms with the present rather than take on the challenges of the unknown in the future, we define those people as conservatives. The people that will not be cowed, that will not abandon their humanity, that continue to not believe, to resist. No amount of explaining or any of that will work totally to repress and eliminate their anger and their tears and all the rest of it. Those I chose to define as progressive or liberal, if you will. I'm thinking of Jefferson's idea about man being a social animal, and that it would be a foolish creator who would create man to live in society and then not instill within man the elements necessary to make man a social animal and to make man really tuned in to his relationship to others, the essence of community. That's in Jefferson's letters. That's the essence of progressivism. That's the essence of liberalism in today's world.
Hey, Dr. Bill.
Bob. Yes.
I know we're almost out of time, and you know what? If we run over by a couple of minutes, we're okay.
Okay.
But I'm sitting here just gobsmacked and knocked over, and I want to point out that there's another word. There's another word for the people who walk away from Omelas.
Right.
Who will not come to terms with the system as it exists.
Okay.
They're anarchists. And
Okay.
I'm not using that term as a pejorative.
I understand. I understand.
They are people who find the idea of such regimentation and such organization and such top-down hierarchy utterly repugnant.
Right.
And I think there is something to be said insofar as Ms. Legan, I never know how to pronounce her name.
I don't either.
There is something to be said for that insofar as she has been an outspoken proponent
Of anarchy.
of anarchy
as a philosophy.
As a philosophy.
Right.
She said that she can't. I think she said something like she can't imagine not having that as part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's right. Of course, if you say anarchy or anarchism to someone from the right wing, they immediately begin tearing at their hair and running in circles and screaming that the end is near.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not exactly what we're talking about, especially if we consider the etymology of the word. And you know how I am about words.
Mm-hmm.
When we have the prefix an, it's a Greek prefix meaning the absence of something.
Okay. This is all new information for me, so keep going. In
the ancient Greek city-states, some of them were run, Sparta was run by a council called the Gerousia, from which we get geriatric, the council of elders. Other Greek city-states were run by people who were referred to as archons. Athens was run by archons.
Mm-hmm.
So to be anarchic is to be without archons.
I see what you're saying.
Which is to be without, without a superstructural governing body.
Without structure, without organization or system or mechanisms or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
And you can argue, I believe, that, for instance, the tribal confederations, which people like Jefferson took governmental notions from, like the Haudenosaunee Confederation, they met in council, and for instance, the people who ran the Mexica, what we call empire, known otherwise as the Aztecs, they had a speaking council.
Okay.
That was more. It was still made up of the lordly class, but it was not strictly. It wasn't. And the word parliament, of course, comes from the French parler, to speak.
To talk, yes.
And so I think recognizing that maybe she's talking about anarchic thought is not the same thing as the anarchism that people think of as, idiots running through streets, throwing bombs and putting bricks through plate glass windows.
Right. That basically the true committed anarchist, from the description that you're giving us, the true analyst would be one. Anarchist would be one who could not live within the system, and therefore would go off and risk the unknown, living, in the unknown, rather than risk the negatives of living within system and organization and top-down authority and all the rest.
And that's not to say that they're going to go off and live some sort of lone wolf existence.
Right.
One can have community and anarchy at the same time.
Okay.
Because it is, while it is leaderless, that does not mean that it is ruleless.
Mm-hmm.
It's consensus driven, where democracy is not necessarily anathematic to anarchy.
Yeah.
You can have consensus based democracy that is based where nobody is the leader. Think about Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
Nobody was the leader.
Yeah, that's why it was so difficult to deal with.
Well, and that is in part why it absolutely drove capitalist power structure.
Power structure nuts.
And that is why it ultimately had to be rubbed out. That's why the for-profit media was constantly producing stories about the dirty, filthy, stinking, yada, 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 Occupy Wall Street. It is at odds not only politically but economically. With the system that we have, and the people who walk away from those who walk away from Omelas, they're not just walking away from the fact that they got nice gardens. They're walking away from a horror that is constantly perpetrated.
Right, and a world that obviously is not ready to do anything about it.
Well, exactly, and in which they feel like their only hope is to walk away, and maybe build something or set something up for a future when this system, and I would suggest inevitably, collapses.
Yes. Bob, I got to tell you that this whole experience for me has been exhilarating. I mean it. I've gotten more out of this story than I ever dreamed when I read it.
Well, I don't know what Ursula K. Le Guin would think about what you have said over the course of these past several programs, but I can't help but think that she would not be entirely unhappy. Because you've raised issues that probably are not raised anywhere else, and certainly David Brooks didn't do any of this.
No, but he sparked it.
Oh, sure.
It really did. And again, that's what secondary sources do. If they can raise the issues, but they cannot give you the answers. You got to go to the sources to get the answers.
And this is an object lesson in that as well.
Right. That was the point. Bob, I want to thank you very much. I know we've gone into Rick Smith's program, and I apologize for that. We're about 5 minutes after, but I want to thank everybody for sticking with us here.
Thank you, Dr. Bill.
And I'm looking forward to tomorrow. We'll go back to the 18th century again. Specifically, what I want to look at is the 14th Amendment. Actually, that's the 19th century. But I want to look at the Supreme Court and the 14th Amendment, and specifically the second paragraph of the 14th Amendment. But it's going to be a little bit, in a way, it's a little bit more technical than we've been dealing with today, but it's perhaps a little bit lighter as well. And whoever thought of dealing with the Supreme Court and saying it's lighter and less substantive than what we've been dealing with, but in a way it is. Bob, thank you. Thank you very much. This is the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We've gone over our time today, but I think, advisedly. I want to thank Bob. I want to thank the Horn, the folks at the Head On Radio Network. I want to thank Ursula Le Guin for absolutely a wonderful, wonderful experience. What a ride for me. I hope it was similar for you.